Welcome, fellow adventurers, as we embark on a quest that will see us explore the likes of Egypt and the fabled land of Atlantis as we look at the history of the original Tomb Raider game. With this year being the 30th anniversary of the legendary Tomb Raider series and the iconic Lara Croft, we felt that this was the perfect time to look at how this incredible and influential game came to be. It is a very interesting story with some twists that you may not have been aware of. If you are a fan of this series, we hope you enjoy looking at the original adventure of Lara Croft. Before we handstand dive our way into this, we just want to thank you for joining us today, and be sure to like and subscribe if you enjoy the video. Plus, we would love to hear all about your memories of the original Tomb Raider, so be sure to leave them in the comments section down below. Toby Gard is a video game designer who is the creator of Lara Croft and the Tomb Raider series. In 1994, he would take a position at British-based video game developer Core Design. His first task was working on the Sega CD port of BC Racers, an arcade-style combat game that was set in the world of Chuck Rock. The PlayStation was a popular topic for discussion among many video game developers, and Core Design was no different, wanting to make games for the system that could take advantage of its powerful 3D capabilities. While chatting with the head of the studio, Jeremy Heath Smith, Toby Gard told him his idea for a 3D adventure game, and this conversation is what put into motion one of the biggest video game series of all time. Jeremy Heath Smith gave Toby the go-ahead to do this once work on BC Racers was completed. In addition to being a 3D game, Toby Gard wanted to make something that was very cinematic, almost like the player was playing a role in a blockbuster Hollywood movie, and that is where the idea for some kind of Indiana Jones-style adventure started to take shape. There was a period of around 6 months of pre-planning before full development of what would become Tomb Raider would start. Toby Gard, along with Paul Douglas, started to put together the basics for the story and what they wanted the game to be at this time. They had a pretty solid plan in place, and before long, the team grew to include 4 more people. Jason Gosling and Gavin Rumry were brought on board to handle programming, and Neil Boyd and the legendary Heather Gibson were tasked with level design. It is interesting that by all accounts, at first, this was a pretty chill development time. Core Design allocated a reported 440,000 British pounds as a budget, and the team got to work. Before we get into the gameplay, we have to address the star of Tomb Raider, Lara Croft, and how she came to be. You could argue that the name Lara Croft in the 90s was just as, if not more famous, than the Tomb Raider series itself, as she was everywhere. However, the road that Toby Gard took to get to the Lara Croft that would be dual-wielding pistols against a Tyrannosaurus Rex is quite an interesting one. During the very early planning stages of Tomb Raider, Gard had the idea of having both a male and female protagonist. The male, by all accounts, was very similar to the iconic character Indiana Jones, and the female character was a cool and tough woman called Laura Cruz. It was realized pretty early on that having 2 playable characters would result in a lot more work. So, with Laura Cruz being the character that Gard liked the best, the decision was made to ditch the male protagonist and build the story and world around Laura Cruz, who would soon become the star, something that the developer of the game, Eidos, were not exactly thrilled about. But Gard and the team stood their ground. But one of the things that Eidos did insist on was a name change, and that was how our heroine became Lara Croft, as in the USA, Eidos was not keen on the name Laura Cruz. Gard knew that he wanted to make Laura cool, tough, and sexy, and that is why she has the design that she does. We would love to hear your thoughts on whether you think Lara Croft would have been just as iconic if she were called Laura Cruz. Be sure to let us know in the comments section below. Toby Gard knew a few key things that he wanted in the story of Tomb Raider pretty much right from the start, such as the actual tomb raiding of places such as the pyramids and the titular tombs that made up the famous title of the legendary series. An interesting early story idea would feature Laura going up against a rival group of Tomb Raiders that were reportedly going to be called the Chaos Raiders. Toby Gard, along with Paul Douglas, had the framework for what they wanted for the character of Lara Croft and what her adventure would be, the places she would go, and so on. However, it would be Vicki Arnold, who joined the Tomb Raider team during development in 1995, that would flesh out the character of Lara Croft and put all of the elements that Gard and Douglas had created into a coherent story full of drama, action, and suspense with a few fantastic twists as well. The story of the original Tomb Raider would not feel out of place in an Indiana Jones movie at all, and that was by design. The plot of the story revolves around an ancient artifact that is called the Scion of Atlantis. Lara Croft is hired by a rich woman called Jacqueline Knopfler to try to track the Scion down. Another treasure hunter, or perhaps mercenary is the better phrasing, Larson, is also part of the quest to track it down. What starts off as a treasure hunt for an ancient artifact soon transforms into an epic adventure that will leave Laura dealing with a T-Rex, countless strange creatures, and even the fabled ruins of Atlantis itself. It is a very well-done story, and Laura is a character that is easy to like. She's cool, sassy, and of course, very easy on the eyes too. The original Tomb Raider would set the tone for what the series would become, and many of the elements that are in the most recent Tomb Raider video games can be seen right here. We would love to hear your memories of the story in Tomb Raider, especially your thoughts on the huge twist that came from who Jacqueline Knopfler really was. Making a full 3D game with exciting gameplay was at the heart of what Toby Gard wanted to do with the original Tomb Raider. One of the biggest inspirations for the gameplay was the classic Prince of Persia game. Gard wanted to take that original, more methodical style of platforming and action and put it into a 3D world and surround it with a fantastic story that was like something out of a huge-budget Hollywood movie. Much like the story, the level design of Tomb Raider was something that Toby Gard put a ton of thought into. He and Paul Douglas actually researched ancient cultures to try to make the stages feel as real as possible and contain many elements from reality as well as fiction. The level design could be very tricky with many instant death traps that novice players would surely fall into. This was a game that was designed to be challenging but fair. The player may want to just run ahead full steam, but these are ancient locations with many secrets and dangers, so Gard and the rest of the team made it so players would have to slow down and often think before they acted. Speaking of thinking, puzzle solving is a huge part of gameplay in the Tomb Raider series, and that all started right here. There are many tricky and fun puzzles that the player will be tasked with solving as they progress through each of the 4 locations that the game has to offer. Interestingly, Tomb Raider was originally conceived as being more of an action game than an exploration one, but Gard and the team changed things up to add more puzzles and have the player explore more. Don't get us wrong, there's still a lot of action in Tomb Raider. Laura has 2 pistols that have unlimited ammo, and she has an auto-locking on system that will focus on the closest enemy when one comes onto the screen. People often overlook this, but what is interesting is that the Z targeting system that people raved about in The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time is very similar to what Tomb Raider offered a couple of years earlier. Granted, Ocarina of Time is a little more refined, but the similarities are as clear as day. Laura can get more weapons as she progresses through the game to take down the enemies that the game throws at her. Interestingly, in the early part of the game, most of the enemies that Laura has to deal with are animals. This was done on purpose, as Gard did not want to have Lara Croft just mowing down hordes of people, even if they were mercenaries with lots of blood on their hands. Laura does eventually have to deal with some actual humans, but there are some very unique characters and even monsters that she will be facing down as she progresses during her journey. While it is so easy to take this for granted today, back in 1996, video game coverage was not what it is now, so many gamers would have had their minds blown by the more fantastical elements that Tomb Raider threw their way as they progressed through the epic adventure. With Tomb Raider being released in 1996, there was no DualShock controller for the PlayStation. The Sega Saturn had a standard D-pad, and of course, there was nothing that could give the PC gamers silky smooth movement either. That meant core design had to go for a more deliberate kind of control scheme, and what we call tank controls. You press up to move up, down to move down, left to move left, and right to move right, no matter what kind of location the camera is in. While this may sound limiting, it may be tough for younger gamers to go back and play a game like this. It was pretty standard for the time, and the original Tomb Raider was a very ambitious game with its level design. Laura could run, climb, jump, shimmy along edges, and even do more athletic stuff like handstanding on the edge of a platform or swan diving into water. For an earlier 3D title, once you get used to her movement and momentum, Laura is a joy to control and has far more abilities than you may expect from a 3D action game from the mid-90s. One thing that the original Tomb Raider games were known for was their difficulty, and these games were no joke. We touched on the instant deaths that could occur if players were not cautious when they entered a new area. However, in general, these are tough games, but most fans agree that the original game is the easiest out of the original games. The two that followed just got harder and harder. This is a game that for sure made you earn that ending. What are your thoughts on the difficulty of the original Tomb Raider games? Be sure to let us know in the comments section down below. When it comes to the sound design in Tomb Raider, it is very interesting. There's no constant music track playing while the player is adventuring. Instead, most of what you hear in Tomb Raider is ambient sounds, and sounds that are coming naturally from the environment or the creatures that are trying to track Laura down. There is music in the game, and it has a more classical English vibe to it, with the composer Nathan McCree looking to old-timey classical English music as the inspiration. The various sound cues that will pop up when you play, along with the more atmospheric sounds of each stage, kind of give certain parts of the game a more eerie feeling to them. It was a rather challenging task for McCree, as he was short on time and resources, and the versions of the music that you hear in Tomb Raider were the very first recording, as there was simply not enough time to make changes. Thankfully, it all came out very well, and all of the music and sound effects feel very fitting to what is happening on screen at the time you hear them. When it came time to find the right voice for Lara Croft, a lot of thought and effort went into this. In 1996, voice acting in games was not what it is today. There was still a lot of bad voice acting during this time, but Tomb Raider for the most part has a great voice cast, and the very talented Shelley Blond, which if we take the L out of her last name is quite fitting, as she has said that they wanted a more scaled back, not very emotional kind of performance, kind of like a female James Bond, and Shelley clearly understood the assignment. She did a fantastic job, and her performance is a huge part of the reason why so many people connected with Lara Croft the way they did. While Shelley Blond did a wonderful job, she would not come back for the sequels. There have been conflicting reports as to why this was, but the most recent interview with Shelley Blond has her saying that she was asked to come back, but she could not due to a scheduling conflict. While the Tomb Raider development went pretty smoothly, there was a bit of a crunch towards the end, with the team really having to roll up their sleeves to make sure that the game was ready for release, but there was actually a very specific reason for this. Many people consider Tomb Raider games a key part of the legacy of the original PlayStation. Tomb Raider is said to be one of the first games that was approved by Sony for the PlayStation, even though once they saw the first version of the game, Sony was not exactly thrilled with the quality of it. It has been said that this was due to core design showing Sony a build of the game that was very early and, in all honesty, not ready to be seen. The Sony PlayStation, PC, and Sega Saturn versions of the game were all being developed at the same time, and for the most part they used the same source code with various tweaks that each platform required. While Sony initially had a couple of concerns, Sega was actually all in with Tomb Raider. As Tomb Raider was coming to the end of its development process, Sega struck a deal with them to have it released as a timed exclusive on the Sega Saturn, and core design only had a matter of weeks to get this done to meet the agreed release date. Tomb Raider would be released for the Sega Saturn on October 24th in Europe. The PlayStation and PC versions would be released in Europe a few weeks later on November 22nd. The exclusivity deal was only for Europe, so all three versions of Tomb Raider would be released in the USA on November 14th. You may be asking if those couple of weeks of console exclusivity in Europe were worth it. Well, no is the easy answer for that. Tomb Raider having to be rushed out the door for the Sega Saturn resulted in a couple of bugs being in the game, the most notable one being that if you positioned Laura just right in the corner, you could infinitely jump up through the stages. Due to still having a few weeks before the PC and PlayStation release, core design was able to fine-tune a couple of things, taking out the bugs that had been discovered in the Sega Saturn version of the game. The video game industry is full of what-ifs, but one particularly huge what-if is, what if Tomb Raider had also been released for the Nintendo 64? There were talks with core design and Nintendo to make this happen, and Paul Douglas was excited to do this and make use of the Nintendo 64's analog stick to control Lara Croft. However, for whatever reason, Nintendo did not send core design a Nintendo 64 development kit in time, and the potential Nintendo 64 version of the original Tomb Raider never even got off the ground. The original Tomb Raider was a massive success. The game was reviewed very well, especially the PlayStation and PC versions of the game, more often than not getting scores in the 9s and the 90s. The few bugs that the Sega Saturn version had did not stop people who had that version of the game from loving it. However, video game publications of the day were all quick to point out that, despite it being good, it was not quite as good as the PlayStation and PC versions of the game. Gamers just fell in love with Tomb Raider and Lara Croft. Interestingly, Lara Croft became a real pop culture icon, and many non-video game publications and news outlets were reporting on the game as it was such a huge deal. It may be hard to imagine now, but back in 1996 there was honestly nothing like Tomb Raider, and the whole world stood up and took notice. While the game released a little earlier on the Sega Saturn, Tomb Raider was a massive system seller for the original PlayStation during the holiday season of 1996. Eidos went all in with Tomb Raider, and there was a massive promotional push, including a real-life model who would portray Lara Croft. The PlayStation was starting to make video games cool and edgier, and Tomb Raider was a huge part of this, especially due to Lara Croft. With Tomb Raider getting those few weeks of exclusivity on the Sega Saturn, you would perhaps think that this would have resulted in Sega trying to make something happen with this, but that would not be the case. Sony was not holding back when it came to trying to become a powerhouse in the world of video games, and they managed to secure console exclusivity until the year 2000 for the Tomb Raider series. Tomb Raider 2 and Tomb Raider 3 would be released for PC as well as PlayStation, but there would be no Tomb Raider 2 or 3 for the Sega Saturn or Nintendo 64. This was a huge coup for PlayStation, and just another reason why many gamers would rather have a PlayStation than a Sega Saturn or Nintendo 64, as it was the only place you could play Tomb Raider. If the interest in Tomb Raider was big, by the time Tomb Raider 2 was released in 1997, Tomb Raider had become a global icon. The original game would get Tomb Raider Gold Edition released for PC, which added a few more levels, but Tomb Raider 2 was something else entirely, and Lara Croft would even get top billing on the title, as the game was actually called Tomb Raider 2 starring Lara Croft. Lara Croft was everywhere. We're not just talking video games, but she was used to advertise products, and a popular magazine even had a spread of her in various sexy poses. Speaking of which, there was also the fabled Nude Raider cheat that people across the globe swore was real. The story was that if you put a code in the game, you could make Lara Croft naked. This was not true, but it did not stop teenagers from all across the world from frantically pressing the buttons to try to make this happen. The original Tomb Raider was released toward the end of 1996, and Tomb Raider 2 was released in November of 1997. In that year, since the game's initial release, Lara Croft just exploded. She became more than just a video game icon, she became a pop culture icon. Lara Croft was every bit as recognizable as characters like Super Mario and Sonic the Hedgehog. Even people who did not play video games knew of Lara Croft. Be sure to let us know what your earliest memories of Lara Croft are, especially if you remember seeing her pop up in any strange, non-video game related places. Like most popular video games from the 80s and 90s, the original Tomb Raider has been released several times over the years. As previously mentioned, Tomb Raider Gold was released in 1997, a special version of the game that came with extra levels. The Mac would get a version of the original game in 1999. Back then, it often took much longer for a game to be released on Mac if it was released at all. However, the iMac was really taking off at this time, and Tomb Raider was so huge that it had to be on everything. When it comes to the first re-release, that would be on the rather obscure Pocket PC device in 2002. However, Tomb Raider would be one of the key titles to be released for the Nokia N-Gage in 2003. This was, in theory, a great idea from Nokia, a phone that was also a dedicated video game device. To be fair, this was as good a port as they could have done on this ill-fated system. The small portrait screen made playing the game much harder than it was on console or PC, but the fact that they got this game running on what was essentially a phone was impressive. Granted, it is not the ideal way to play Tomb Raider, but it is a fun piece to have in a collection. The original Tomb Raider would be made available on the PlayStation 3 when Sony started offering classic PlayStation titles as downloadable games. This was first released in 2009 and then made available around the world in 2010. In 2015, with phones getting more powerful, Tomb Raider was ported to iPhone, and this version of the game would be available for purchase for the better part of a decade before it was pulled from the iOS store. In February 2024, Tomb Raider 1, 2, and 3 Remastered would be released for PlayStation, Xbox, Nintendo Switch, and PC. This brought the original 3 titles back with some modern enhancements, including higher resolution visuals, better performance, and a new control scheme. While fans liked having the original trilogy back, and those who grew up with the games liked going back and playing through Laura's original adventures. This was not exactly a super well done package, and it did have a few bugs. Not many people had kind things to say about the supposed modern and better control system. Also, the game was missing a rewind feature, something many classic game collections included. One of the most fun re-releases was Tomb Raider Collection 1. This was released for the Blaze Evercade. The Blaze Evercade is a handheld and also home console device that plays cartridges. The idea being each cartridge would contain a collection of games, come in a collector-friendly clamshell box, and also include a manual. For people who like physical media and collecting video games, the Evercade ecosystem was seen as something that was awesome. In 2024, the Tomb Raider Collection 1 was released to widespread acclaim from the Evercade audience, showing just how popular this series was. Blaze would release a special black version of the Evercade VS console that came packaged with Tomb Raider Collection 1. This was very popular and just what some people needed to take the jump into the world of Evercade. By the time we got to Tomb Raider Chronicles, released in 2000 for the PlayStation, Sega Dreamcast, and PC, many people felt the Tomb Raider formula was getting a bit stale. The series needed a reboot, and this came in the form of Tomb Raider: The Angel of Darkness in 2003, which would be the first game in the series to be released on the PlayStation 2. This game went through a bit of development hell, and it was not fondly received when it was released due to the many bugs that it had, in addition to cut content to ensure that the game was released around the same time as the second live-action Tomb Raider movie, Lara Croft Tomb Raider: The Cradle of Life. The less than positive reception to The Angel of Darkness led to the series taking a break for a few years and a new developer, Crystal Dynamics, being put in charge of the series. Their first game, 2006's Tomb Raider Legend, was a big success. People loved this new version of Lara Croft. It had a great story, and more importantly, the game was a lot of fun to play. Using that same engine, Crystal Dynamics would release Tomb Raider Anniversary in 2007, which was a fun reimagining of the original Tomb Raider that would see a release on PlayStation 2, Xbox 360, Nintendo Wii, PlayStation Portable, and PC. You may think that would be it for the remaking and re-releasing of the original Tomb Raider, but that is not the case. During the Game Awards 2025, it was revealed that there would be 2 new Tomb Raider games coming, one of which would be called Tomb Raider Catalyst, that was due to be released in 2027. However, before that, we will be getting Tomb Raider Legacy of Atlantis in 2026, a full remake of the original game. From massive Hollywood movies to action figures to comic books to a Netflix animated series, for as popular as the original 1996 Tomb Raider game was, there was no way that any of us could have known that over 30 years later, the series, and of course Lara Croft, would still be a huge player in the world of video games. Thanks for joining us on this adventure today. Be sure to check out our other videos that feature other iconic video games and characters. We have more great videos planned based on some of the biggest and best games of all time, so be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out. We would love to hear all about your memories of the Tomb Raider series, so let us know in the comments section what your favorite memory of this iconic series is.